gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to speak to you. This is a subject which is actually quite close to my heart because transparency, I guess, is probably the key to all consumer choice and concern. Sorry, so I've never been, I have never had any doubts that transparency is central in a market economy. Consumers need to make informed choices, and for that transparency is key. But let me actually start somewhere else. Just a few years ago, I was actually talking one-to-one with the chairperson of the TRAI. He should, for the purpose of this, remain nameless. We were talking about consumer experience and this, that, and I at one point told him, so it's actually very bad for my business as a consultant, but let me tell you one thing, that even I don't understand my phone bill. And he said, Mahesh, I'll tell you something, even I don't. So the transparency of billing is an issue. And obviously it's an issue whose dimensions are several, because remember, the vast majority of us don't get a bill, because this is obviously something applicable to postpaid people. The prepaid guy doesn't even get a bill. So clearly there is an issue. But before we start picking up stones and beating up on the operators, I think it is also important that we identify what the problems are. And which is not it's not my point, as Pankaj was also saying, that there are rogue players, there are rogue issues in all industries. So the point is not to say that, oh, please understand their side, and therefore that there really is no problem. There is a problem. But let's understand one thing. The vast majority, 97% of India's connections are wireless. Okay, unlike in most countries where you have a large fixed line, you have alternate networks, you have satellites, etc. You have fixed line phones, etc. Even when we have to talk to our family next door, we speak on the mobile phone. So, but that does mean our reliance on wireless technology is really quite unique in the world, especially when it comes to comparison with the developed world. In case of wireless, unlike in the case of a wireline, where by and large it's a predictable line, once the wire is connected to your phone, virtually everything about it becomes largely predictable. On the other hand, with a wireless phone, the quality of your experience depends on where you're located with respect to the tower, where in your building you are. If you're in a basement like now, I'm sure half of you are finding the connection to be pretty poor, right? Where you are, whether there is a huge concrete building in between you and the tower, whether you have a smartphone or a not so smartphone. And remember that more than half of our phones today are feature phones, which have basically 2G capability, and so on and so forth. Then of course, whether you got a grey market phone, whether you got a second-hand phone, whether the phone was already damaged, and of course, most of us have no experience of figuring out whether the problem is with that instrument, problem is with the operator, etc. And I think Rajan made an important point that when we are talking about laying blame, we must be sure about who the blame rightfully belongs to. And in wireless, this is a very complex problem. So the real problem, therefore, is if we go on this whole hunt for looking for crooks and looking for badmashes, I think it's going to be very difficult and virtually unenforceable. This is like somebody mentioned. It's a huge industry with a huge number of users, and even the regulatory body. I recall at the time when the body was set up, I had something to do with it, and one of the issues that came up at that time was whether the body would actually take individual user complaints. And this is also in reference to what T.V. Ramchandran said. And it was decided then that the body would not take individual consumer complaints because the size of the problem would be so huge that the body will have no time to do anything else. Because even at that time, and I'm talking about 96, 97, the body, the DOT had several crore complaints that had not been addressed. So the idea that a regulatory body of a country as big as this could address individual complaints was not going to work. So clearly something else had to be done. So you had to design better regulation. And this is where we come to the issue of labels. I would argue that really we must distinguish between labels and the reporting that the companies do. And that is a distinction. Let me tell you how. I think the kind of granularity that Dr. Sage has talked about and you're talking about would be very useful if it was reported to the regulator, but not particularly useful if it was available to the individual user who has no serious competence. In fact, most of us have no competence to actually figure out or to deal with that. But where the regulator can come into the picture, and really, okay, so when this information is available, then of course the app developer, the consumer groups, and a whole lot of others could in fact bring a whole lot of expertise to bear on the subject and help you choose. For example, if you decided today to buy a new phone, you would probably go to the web and figure out which is the best phone. And you will probably soon, if you look carefully, it'll tell you that, look, if you are looking for a simple voice connection, you can do with a feature phone. If you want some internet on the run, then it's this. But if you want to do serious computing, then you should buy a phone like this. If you're a gamer, you should do this. If your bread and butter is simply watching videos on your mobile, then you should get a different type of phone or a different type of connection. So the question then is that what we need is, do we have information to decide what is the best product, what is the best operator to make these choices? So where the TRAI can help, I think, is to help first to catalyze and to encourage people to produce apps that will help answer questions that typically consumers have. Then provide some level of some awareness of this on its website. I think one of the weaknesses, and I think this is a big problem at the TRAI, I think, and I would imagine consumer groups need to take this up, is that if you look at the TRAI website, there is virtually very little on the consumer part of the website. There is a lot more on operator data, there is tons of information about a whole lot of things. But for example, how should you buy a phone? You know, how should you evaluate an operator? How should you worry about what is the best reason to take MNP, etc. All that kind of information, which is exceptionally useful to consumers, is just not there. And I think where the TRAI could help, in my view, is actually being the intermediary between the data reported and the consumer. In other words, can it help either by itself or through involving other agencies, in fact, even app developers, etc., to create those kinds of products which are in the middle, which help consumers make informed choices. I don't think the labels per se, unless they are of the kind that Ashwini Rana mentioned, which are basically simple. I mean, when we go to the web, when you're choosing phones, it tells you 9 out of 10 for an iPhone and 8 out of 10 for an HTC and 3 out of 10 for something else. It works for most of us, and if you are a very sophisticated user, you will look at the detail. You might say that, look, it's a It's an expensive phone, but it's light, and I want to still use it. I'm happy to pay the extra. Somebody says, look, something else is of value to it. So I think at the consumer end, the labels have to be ultra simple, ultra usable. But I think we need to create a facility, something that the consumers can use in the form of a group of applications, services, etc., whether these are electronic as an apps or whether it is consumer groups with competence, who can tell a consumer, who can use that data far more effectively than an end user can, and make sense of it for the consumer in his or her context. So that would be my my last point. Thank you.